Hello everyone and welcome back to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben. This episode focuses on thinking like an actor so your NPCs behave believably, respond consistently, and create tension in a natural way, especially when you're improvising. If you've ever wanted your social scenes to feel sharper, more dramatic, and easier to run without pages of notes, then this set of tools is going to do a lot of work for you. I've covered some of these topics before here on the channel, but I wanted to revisit them and add a comprehensive how-to guide. So, grab a drink, settle in, and let's lift the curtain on some acting techniques that actors use every day and that game masters can use starting tonight. Actors often start with what Stanislavski called the given circumstances. This is the total set of facts that shape what a character can plausibly do in a scene. It includes where they are, when they are, what just happened, what they're responsible for, what they can't afford to lose, what's socially permitted, what's physically possible. Stanislavski's point wasn't trivia, it was narrative gravity. If you want an NPC to feel like a person instead of a quest kiosk, you anchor them in circumstances that press on them from all sides. In practice, I like to think of given circumstances as constraints that create behavior. So instead of writing Captain Roulden is stern and honorable, you write Captain Roulden is being audited by the city council. He's covering for 3 guards who took bribes, and tonight he's short-staffed because half the watch is sick. Those circumstances force choices. Suddenly, his conversation with the party has texture. He's brisk, he's allergic to complications, he's suspicious of anyone asking too many questions. And he's tempted, dangerously tempted, by solutions that keep his scandal from becoming common knowledge. That entire performance emerges from conditions, not from you trying to, quote, act stern. Stanislavski frames given circumstances as the concrete facts of the plot, time, place, and way of life that an actor uses to generate truthful action. Now, translate this into a quick game master habit. When you introduce an NPC, pick 2 enduring circumstances and 1 immediate pressure. Enduring circumstances are the slow burn facts. Things like debt, rank, obligation, illness, surveillance, forbidden love, political patronage. Immediate pressure is the thing happening today. The inspection in an hour, the angry spouse in the next room, the rival who just walked in, the messenger who hasn't arrived, the lock that needs opening before dawn. Then, when the players speak, you don't have to invent personality traits, you let the pressure speak. A town guard who's been taking small bribes will behave very differently when the immediate pressure is a merchant is asking questions than when the pressure is the captain of the watch is watching from across the square. It's the same guard with the same flaw, but the situation changes how that flaw shows up. Same NPC, different narrative gravity, different scene. The language of objective, obstacle, and tactic comes out of 20th century acting and directing practice, particularly the tradition associated with Stanislavski, and of course later refinements developed in American actor training. Stanislavski pushed actors away from thinking in terms of emotion or personality and toward thinking in terms of action, what a character wants in a scene and what stands in the way of getting it. That idea was picked up and systematized by later teachers and practitioners, especially in what came to be known as practical aesthetics, where scenes are analyzed through a clear, workable structure. An objective that is specific and playable, an obstacle that creates resistance, and a series of tactics, the moment-to-moment methods a character uses to try to overcome that resistance. Actors are often trained to pursue objectives actively, adjust tactics when something fails, and let conflict emerge naturally from opposition rather than from heightened emotion. That same framework translates cleanly to role playing games because it replaces vague role play better advice with a practical way to generate behavior under pressure. One reason social scenes fizzle is that we often treat them like an information exchange. Players ask questions, NPC answers, everyone nods, scene ends. Give the NPC an objective that is specific and relational. I want the party to leave the inn without starting a fight. I want them to sign the contract tonight. I want them to admit they were at the docks. I want them to feel guilty enough to back down. Then name an obstacle. They're armed and proud. They don't trust me. They have evidence. They're in a hurry. Their cleric is reading my face. Finally, pick a tactic, the method used right now. It might be something like charm, stall, flatter, intimidate, bargain, appeal to principle, appeal to fear, redirect, shame, seduce, confuse, or recruit. The trick that makes this work is that objectives tend to stay stable while tactics can change rapidly. So if a scene starts to drag, you don't need a speech, you pivot tactics. The innkeeper starts with polite warmth. Friends, it's late, let's all breathe. And when that fails, the innkeeper shifts to social leverage. The magistrate eats here. I'd hate for your names to reach him. And if that fails, the innkeeper shifts to fear. You hear that whistle outside? That's not for closing time. The objective never moved. The approach evolved, which is what creates dramatic momentum. Here's a second example. A temple priest wants the party to stop investigating a missing acolyte because the priest is complicit. The objective is to end the conversation with their suspicion lowered. The obstacle is that the ranger has physical evidence. The wizard is also too curious. Tactics over time, perhaps a moral appeal. This is sacred ground. Show some restraint. Or misdirection. Many travelers vanished this season. Bandits, wolves, or controlled vulnerability. I didn't want to tell you this, but the acolyte struggled with dark thoughts. And finally, a bargain. Leave this to the temple and I will owe you a favor in writing. Even if the player never draws swords, the scene has turns because the priest is actively trying to win something instead of just delivering lore. Keith Johnstone's work in improvisational theater approaches status as something fluid and constantly shaped through interaction rather than a fixed trait or a social label. He shows how status is communicated through small, often unconscious behaviors. Who interrupts and who gets interrupted? Who apologizes? Who fills silences? Who avoids eye contact? Who takes up space and who waits to be addressed? A key insight in his thinking is the distinction between status and rank. A king may display low status through anxiety, defensiveness, or a need for approval, while a servant can temporarily occupy high status by remaining calm, unhurried, or by controlling something the other person wants. Status in this sense emerges from the confidence and ease with which someone moves through an interaction in a given moment, rather than from their formal position or title. For game masters, this is incredibly useful because it allows you to communicate power and tension instantly, without exposition or speeches. You don't need to tell the players that an NPC is dangerous, important, or in control. You let them feel it. Status creates drama because it's relational. It only exists between people, and it shifts in response to pressure. A duke can lose status in a conversation when they are desperate, cornered, or trying too hard to appear reasonable. A beggar can gain status when they control access to vital information and take pleasure in deciding when or whether to share it. These moments feel real because they mirror how power actually works in human interaction. At the table, you can make status legible through a few simple behavioral dials. The first is control of tempo. High status NPCs tend to speak more slowly, pause without discomfort, and allow silence to stretch until someone else breaks it. Low status NPCs often rush, over-explain, or speak to fill the gap. The second dial is control of topic. High status characters decide what is being discussed and feel no obligation to answer every question directly. They redirect conversations with ease. Low status characters follow the conversational lead of others. The third dial is control of space and attention. High status NPCs assume they are worth attention, and they do not compete for it, while low status NPCs subtly seek permission through deference, hedging, language, or physical withdrawal. Consider a negotiation scene in practice. The party meets a smuggler boss in a candle-lit back room. You can establish the boss's high status without volume, threats, or theatrics. They remain seated when the party enters. They finish writing a sentence before looking up. They ask a single question and then wait calmly through the silence. If a player attempts intimidation, you don't need a counter threat. You respond with a status move, a faint smile, a brief glance toward a guard by the door, a neutral, "That's interesting," followed by an immediate change of subject to price or logistics. The boss never acknowledges the threat directly, and that dismissal communicates power far more effectively than shouting ever could. The players understand who controls the room because the behavior tells them so. Status transactions also give you a powerful way to create turning points inside a scene. Imagine that during this negotiation, the party's paladin casually references a sacred order that the smuggler secretly fears. For a brief moment, the smuggler's status might dip. Their eyes flick away, their voice tightens, or they respond a fraction of a second too quickly. That beat matters. Then, just as quickly, they attempt to recover status with a new tactic, smoothing things over, reframing the conversation, or offering a concession. "Of course," they say, offering a smile. "People like you and me can always come to an arrangement." In that exchange, nothing mechanical changed, but the story advanced because power shifted. The scene became memorable because of how status moved under pressure. A great deal of modern acting pedagogy, especially work influenced by Uta Hagen, circles around a deceptively simple idea. Spoken lines are not the action of a scene. The action is what one character is trying to do to another person while those lines are being spoken. Actors are often trained to avoid playing emotions or delivering lines for their own sake. Instead, they prepare by grounding themselves in circumstance, specificity, and intention, so that whatever comes out of their mouth is driven by a concrete need in the moment. The goal is to use dialogue as a means to pursue something real: approval, leverage, safety, dominance, forgiveness, rather than to treat the exchange as a performance. When that pursuit is clear, the words tend to take care of themselves. For tabletop role-playing games, this idea translates cleanly into a single usable instruction. Choose the verb beneath the dialogue. Before you speak as an NPC, decide what that NPC is actively doing to the party right now. Are they testing the party's resolve? Trying to recruit them into a cause? Stalling for time? Soothing tempers, cornering someone into a concession, warning them off, buying loyalty, hiding guilt? That verb doesn't need to be spoken aloud. It just needs to exist in your head as the engine driving the exchange. Once you have it, you can say very ordinary things and they will land with intention because the underlying action shapes tone, pacing, and follow-up. This approach is powerful because it produces depth without speeches or exposition. You don't need long monologues or elaborate backstory reveals to convey complexity. The subtext does the work. Consider something maybe you've used dozens of times at the table. I'm sure we can work something out. If the subtext verb is recruiting, the line comes out warm and inclusive, slightly conspiratorial, an invitation into shared purpose. If the verb is stalling, the same words stretch time. Offers of tea, small talk, reassurances that there's no rush. If the verb is cornering, the line becomes a velvet threat, delivered calmly but with implied consequences. You can apply this just as easily to scenes that often feel flat, like quest givers or authority figures. A mayor who says, "We need your help," can be doing very different things under the surface. They might be begging, terrified that failure will expose their incompetence. They might be buying, treating the party as tools to be deployed. They might be hiding, trying to keep attention away from a mistake they made. Or they might be testing, watching closely to see how the party reacts, because they suspect the party is already involved. Once you choose that verb, the rest of the conversation starts to create itself. The mayor interrupts differently. They answer questions differently. They react to refusal differently. What makes subtext so useful for game masters is that it scales beautifully with improvisation. You don't have to plan dialogue in advance, you only have to know what the NPC wants to do in that moment. If players push back, you know how to react in that moment. If the pressure increases, the verb can sharpen or shift. Subtext becomes an infinite generator of believable dialogue because it keeps scenes rooted in action rather than explanation, and because it mirrors how real people communicate, rarely saying exactly what they mean, but always trying to get something done. One of the simplest and most reliable ways to make an NPC feel alive is to give them what actors call a moment before. A clear sense that they were already in motion, physically, emotionally, or mentally, just before the scene began. In acting traditions influenced by Uta Hagen, the moment before is part of basic preparation. Actors are trained to enter scenes already carrying momentum from something that has just happened, rather than arriving as blank slates. That prior moment shapes posture, tone, pacing, and emotional temperature, often without the audience consciously noticing it. The character doesn't need to explain what happened, the residue of it is enough to make the entrance feel real. For game masters, this doesn't require backstory or flashbacks. It's usually a single sentence of situational charge. The wizard doesn't calmly open the door, they fling it open too fast, sleeves scorched because something went wrong in the lab moments ago. The informant doesn't step out of the shadows on cue, they're already mid-argument with someone who slips away the instant the party is noticed. With one small detail, you've told the table that the world was moving before the players arrived, and will keep moving after they leave. The moment before also does a tremendous amount of emotional work for you. It gives NPCs a believable emotional starting point without requiring you to manufacture drama on the spot. A villain's entrance becomes far more compelling when it carries prior momentum. A queen enters a council chamber sharp and guarded because she has just finished reading a letter that confirms her worst suspicions. A city guard arrives jittery and distracted because the previous patrol found a body in an alley nearby. None of this needs to be explained in detail. The players feel it immediately because human behavior always carries traces of what came before. Used consistently, the moment before helps solve a common immersion problem. NPCs that feel like they exist only when addressed. When every entrance implies an interrupted action, a recent emotion, or an unfinished intention, the setting gains depth. Scenes feel less like turn-based conversations, and more like intersections in an ongoing world. You also gain a subtle pacing tool. Calm moments before produce quiet, controlled scenes. Chaotic moments before inject urgency and instability. One detail on intrigue, one breathless line, one distracted glance, one unfinished action can change the temperature of an entire interaction without you ever having to say, "This is tense." So now let's look at some practical how-to of using this acting theory at your table. So let's start with given circumstances. To use given circumstances at the table, start by shrinking the idea down to something you can actually hold in your head during play. The aim is to focus on the forces currently shaping behavior rather than attempting to model an entire life. So, pick 2 enduring facts about the NPC and 1 immediate pressure that matters right now. Enduring facts are long-term constraints: debt, oath, injury, secret loyalty, reputation, fear, obligation, things that don't disappear just because the party showed up. Immediate pressure is the today problem: a deadline, a witness nearby, an inspection, a rival entering the room, a mistake about to be discovered. Once you know what presses on an NPC, you can stop inventing personality and let behavior emerge on its own. You can apply this just as easily in other genres. In a cyberpunk game, a street doc with unlicensed clinic and protects regulars behaves one way when the pressure is a client is bleeding out on the table, and another when the pressure is a corp drone is slowly scanning faces outside the door. In the first case, the doc may bark orders, cut corners, and demand help immediately. In the second, the doc lowers their voice, cuts conversation short, and becomes evasive about names and records. The key practical move is to treat given circumstances as active forces, not background flavor. If the party asks a question that threatens one of those circumstances, the NPC reacts defensively, even if the question is reasonable. If the party offers a way to relieve an immediate pressure, the NPC becomes cooperative, even if they don't fully trust the PCs. This technique also gives you a reliable recovery tool when a scene starts to flatten out. If you catch yourself drifting into a generic, helpful NPC voice, pause, look back at the circumstances, and ask yourself which of these is most threatened by what the players just did. Now let's talk about objective, obstacle, and tactic. This technique works best when you treat it like a small, self-contained engine you can restart anytime a scene begins to stall or drift. Instead of thinking about dialogue, attitude, or emotion, you focus on 3 concrete elements that are always present in a dramatic interaction. First, give the NPC a right now objective aimed directly at the players. Objectives should be simple, actionable, and limited to the scope of the current scene. Get them to leave. Get them to pay. Get them to sign. Get them to admit something. Get them to stop asking questions. Get them to take responsibility. If the objective can't plausibly be achieved within the scene, it's probably too large. Next, identify the obstacle that makes that objective difficult. Obstacles are where tension comes from. They might be the party's suspicion, a law or custom that restricts what can be said, a time limit, divided loyalties, conflicting authority, or fear of what will happen if the truth comes out. An objective without an obstacle resolves immediately. An obstacle without an objective leads to evasive NPCs who go nowhere. You need both for a scene to have momentum. But finally, choose a tactic, which is the method the NPC is using right now to overcome the obstacle. Tactics are flexible and disposable. Flattery, guilt, bargaining, intimidation, stalling, moral appeal, distraction, humor, appeals to shared identity, appeals to fear, appeals to duty. All of these are tactics. The crucial insight is that objectives tend to stay stable during a scene, while tactics change as pressure increases. When players push back, succeed on a roll, or introduce new information, the NPC doesn't usually abandon their goal, they switch tactics. So, for example, in fantasy court play, a steward's objective might be keep the party from speaking to the queen. The obstacle is the party has a legitimate royal invitation. The steward's first tactic is polite procedure, calm tone, ritual language, and delay. We'll announce you when Her Majesty is ready. When the party insists, the tactic shifts to social pressure. Breaking protocol reflects poorly on everyone involved. In a horror game, a caretaker's objective might be keep the group from entering the basement. The obstacle is the group believes something is wrong and that the answer to that wrongness is in the basement. The caretaker starts with reassurance. Oh, it's just old storage. When that fails, the tactic shifts to stalling. Well, the door's stuck. We'll deal with it tomorrow. When that fails, the tactic might shift again to anger or fear. You have no idea what you're meddling with. At no point does the caretaker explain the truth outright, because doing so would directly undermine the objective. When you're running this technique live, the Game Master move is straightforward. If the players resist successfully, you change the tactic. If the players introduce new information, you can update the obstacle. If the players accept a deal, force a concession, or break the NPC's leverage, the objective is resolved and the scene ends naturally. Now let's talk about status transactions. To use status transactions effectively, stop thinking in terms of this NPC is powerful or this NPC outranks the party, and start thinking in terms of who controls the moment right now. Status in Johnstone's sense is not a fixed label. It's something negotiated continuously through behavior. You decide an NPC's starting status relative to the party, high, equal, or low, and then communicate that status through small, readable choices rather than declarations. High status behavior often appears as calm tempo, comfort with silence, minimal explanation, and casual control over what the conversation is about. Low status behavior often shows up as rushing, hedging language, apologizing, over-explaining, deferring, or asking permission to speak. What makes this technique powerful for game masters is that it lets you communicate dominance, vulnerability, or authority without speeches or intimidation roles. In a Western, a bartender can hold high status over armed strangers simply by acting unimpressed. They keep wiping a glass. They don't flinch when hands drift towards holsters, and they let silence stretch until they decide to speak. The message is clear. Violence would be inconvenient, not frightening. Status becomes even more interesting when it contradicts expectations. In a fantasy dungeon, a captured cultist may begin in low status. They're bound, wounded, frightened. But the moment they realize the party needs them alive to navigate the temple or stop a ritual, their status shifts. Their posture straightens, their voice steadies. They stop begging and start setting conditions. Untie me first, then we talk. Status is especially effective in social spaces where rank and power are assumed to be clear, but behavior undermines those assumptions. In a fantasy court, a queen might technically hold absolute authority, but if she enters a council chamber visibly shaken by recent news, avoids eye contact, and speaks too quickly, her status in that moment is lower than usual. The real power of status transactions comes from shifts, not from static positioning. So think about and plan at least one believable trigger that could raise or lower an NPC's status during a scene. This might be the presentation of a sealed writ, a public insult that goes unanswered, the revelation of a secret fear, a credible show of force, or the arrival of an authority figure whose allegiance is uncertain. When the player characters trigger that, or when you trigger it, you show it through behavior. A high-status NPC who suddenly loses control may start speaking faster, explaining themselves unnecessarily, or avoiding silence. A low-status NPC who gains leverage may stop answering questions directly. Now let's look at subtext as action. To apply subtext as action, reduce the idea to a single repeatable habit. Before you speak as an NPC, decide what that NPC is trying to do to the player characters with the line that they're going to say. Rather than choosing an emotion or clever wording, you're choosing an action. Pick a verb. To test, to recruit, to stall, to soothe, to corner, to shame, to reassure, to bribe, to provoke, to intimidate, to distract. And let that verb shape tone, pacing, and follow-up. You can see this clearly in genres that rely heavily on atmosphere. In horror, a caretaker saying, "You really shouldn't go down there," changes meaning based on action. To soothe, it sounds protective and genuinely concerned, almost parental. You really shouldn't go down there. To hide, the line comes out clipped in force as though saying it aloud is dangerous. You really shouldn't go down there. The dialogue does not change, but the scene does, because the caretaker is doing something different with the line. In fantasy, subtext turns everyday NPC interactions into loaded moments. A city official saying the gates are closed for the night might be spoken to enforce the law, to test the party's willingness to bribe, or to warn them that something dangerous is happening inside the walls. A priest saying, "The gods see all," might be used to reassure, to shame, or to threaten, depending on the action beneath the words. In a political court scene, a noble's "we'll discuss this later" can be spoken to dismiss an inferior, to protect someone from public scrutiny, or to postpone a confrontation until leverage is secured. At the table, subtext becomes a diagnostic tool. If a scene starts to feel flat or repetitive, it's usually because the NPC is speaking without an action. Pause for half a second, pick a verb, and speak again. That shift alone creates motion. Conversations start feeling like people pushing, pulling, and negotiating in real time. Also, if you need inspiration, I have a verb list that you can download for free, linked below. Now let's talk about the moment before. To use the moment before effectively, focus on one simple goal. Make NPC entrances carry momentum instead of neutrality. Characters should almost never feel as though they were standing still, waiting for the party to arrive. The practical step is to attach one small, specific detail to an NPC's arrival that implies what was happening immediately prior. An interrupted task, a recent argument, a mistake, narrowly avoided decision just made, or an emotion that hasn't cooled yet. Instead of inventing backstory or narrating a flashback, you're leaving a residue. That residue tells the players that time is moving even when they're not in the room. A temple acolyte opens the door breathless, robes half fastened, because a ritual was interrupted when the party arrived. A city official greets the party while hastily hiding a stack of ledgers under a desk, because an audit was moments away from becoming a scandal. Each of these tells the table something important before a single explanation is offered. A caretaker opens the door too quickly, as though they've been listening from the other side. A crime boss welcomes the party warmly, but there's broken glass on the floor behind them that no one acknowledges, because someone else didn't leave as politely. To make the moment before dependable in play, build a tiny habit. When an NPC appears, ask yourself one question. What were they doing 10 seconds ago? Answer it with one concrete sensory detail, something visual, physical, or behavioral, and then stop. Let the scene unfold from there. Over time, this becomes automatic, and NPCs start to feel like they exist continuously rather than only when addressed. That single detail does more work than paragraphs of description, and it's one of the fastest ways to make a setting feel alive, responsive, and inhabited. One of the most useful ways to think about these techniques is as additions to your Game Master toolkit, flexible tools you can reach for when a scene needs clarity, tension, or momentum. Mastery in this craft doesn't come from using every tool all the time. It comes from knowing which tools serve the kind of story and experience you're trying to create with this table in this campaign right now. Some groups thrive on subtle status play and layered subtext, while others respond better to clear objectives and overt pressure. Some genres benefit from charged entrances and emotional residue, while others want clean, functional interactions that move quickly. None of these approaches are universal, and they don't need to be. The value of learning techniques like given circumstances, objectives and tactics, status transactions, subtext as action, and the moment before is that they expand your range. You can reach for the tool that fits the situation instead of forcing every scene to work the same way. Use what clicks with you and your players. Set aside what doesn't. And don't worry about completeness. The more tools you have at your disposal, the more likely you are to have the right one when a scene stalls, a character falls flat, or the story needs a subtle push forward. So that's the kit. Given circumstances to create gravity, objectives, obstacles to create motion, status transactions to make power visible, subtext as action to keep dialogue sharp, and the moment before to make entrances feel like the world existed prior to the scene. If you found this video useful, or if you have questions, drop those in the comments section below. Don't forget about the free downloadable verb list below, and also don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more RPG content. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.